I'm guessing you're going to tell me you didn't get any or very little of what you wanted.
Well, this is a budget which represents something of a missed opportunity. It's a government that is nodding to many of the crises that my party has identified, crises in education, in mental health, and they're giving some small amounts of money towards that. But let's remember, we had released yesterday child and adolescent mental health waiting times, which are the second worst in history of those services. And yet we're talking about £17 million extra funding. That's £183 million adrift of where the most conservative estimates are of where we need to be.
Well, fine, but if you're saying, look, he should have put in more money into your favourite areas, and if he's put taxes up for a lot of people, if only a minority, what are you suggesting? Are you suggesting he should have cut money from other areas, and if so, which?
We had a very different tax plan. We believe that with our tax plan of a modest penny on income tax, everybody would have known where they stood, and we would have brought in a guaranteed £500 million, which would have been a radical transformational investment in both education and mental health, neither of which will be achieved by the revenues brought in by the tax changes announced today.
But hang on, no, £500 million would have been £200 million to cover the real terms cut for the next financial year, and £300 million to pay for a 3% public sector pay rise, which would have left precisely zilch for your planned funds.
There's actually a very, very important point there. The government isn't covering the 3% uplift in public sector pay for Scottish local authorities, and that's the big story here. If you've got a flat cash settlement for Scottish councils, 32 Scottish councils, they're going to have to find the money for that much needed 3% increase in public sector pay. That's going to represent a brutal cut to services. To anyone who relies on or works for a local authority, this budget is actually really bad news.
Well, Andy Whiteman, that is a very important point, isn't it? Because it is possible that the Scottish Government could say, yes, 3% for public sector workers, but then only give 1% to local authorities to pay for it, which means services would have to be cut to fund the rest of it. So is part of your demand for backing the budget that the 3%, perhaps fractionally more, pay increase that you want be funded by central government?
Well, we want to see the revenue budgets in real terms of local government protected, and that means an increase. And that will, of course, include covering any pay rises that are negotiated between COSLA and the unions. The Scottish Government's responsibility in terms of public sector pay are people who are paid through the Scottish Government public sector pay negotiations. But you want any local authority increase to be funded by central government in what it gives to local authorities in order to pay for that? Well, because otherwise you're just going to have more cuts in local authority budgets. Well, we can argue about where precisely the money is coming from. Actually, I mean, you raise an important point here, because we should not go into any future budgets arguing about how much money central government's going to give to local. Actually, local government needs to be given much, much greater fiscal autonomy in order to be able to plan its own affairs and to set its own funding priorities. And that's the big structural change that we've still not seen. They're basically asking for crumbs from the table, and that's no longer. I don't think that will, be acceptable, for next year moving on. Right,
so we are at the start of these negotiations over the budget, obviously, so let's just, to finish with, get a whiff of where we are. I'm detecting thanks but no thanks from you, Alex Gilhamel.
Well, we're a considerable distance apart here. I think at a time like this, when, as you heard from Fraser earlier, that the OBR and our own analysis show that Scottish output and Scottish economy is in dire straits, you need to take this opportunity and make a transformational investment in funding education. Education is the root out of economic problems.
Andy Whiteman, the Green